poverty.
I'm a diabetic and I'm running out of food.
Healthcare.
Some days you want to go to the doctor and see what else is wrong with you, but you can't.
Education.
I can't believe that this is happening. Why are they doing this? Why our school?
Just a few of the issues that shape the world we live in. Solving the problems that hold our community back requires a harder look and an open mind. Tonight, we're digging deeper into another complex topic: racial inequality.
We're not racist because we love this country. We're not racist because we love that flag.
We're fed up with the treatment and the disrespect.
This is a special presentation. Action News Jax Gets Real about racial inequality.
Good evening, I'm Tanika Hughes.
I'm John Bachman. We're living in times when the need for tough conversations and the acceptance of diverse opinions is critical.
Action News Jax is committed to making sure that voices in our community are heard, and we're launching a new initiative to get real about the topics that have tremendous impacts on our community.
We're listening. We're driving conversations on topics like racism, housing, healthcare, and policing. We're working with the community to enable discussions to bring us closer to resolution and common ground. Today, tomorrow, and every day, Action News Jax gets real.
As a diverse newsroom, we'll work together to present these stories fairly and with respect to all the facts.
Tonight, one of the many issues we are discussing, racial inequality.
And to change the future, you have to understand the past. Action News Jax Phil Amato shows us some of the events in Jacksonville that set the stage for where we are today.
The history of race relations in Jacksonville begins with slavery. African Americans were held in bondage for centuries before the city was even founded as Calford. The freeing of the slaves would follow the Civil War. These Americans would continue to face incredible hardships to survive. Communities would spring up to support one another and took the form of churches like Mount Zion AME and Bethel Baptist. Key moments in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s happened in Jacksonville, often violently, like on August 27, 1960, known as Axe Handle Saturday, when whites attacked peaceful sit-in demonstrators downtown. A few years later, a federal judge would order the Duval County School Board to comply with Brown versus the Board of Education and desegregate schools. In that same decade, Duval County voters approved consolidation, creating a new Jacksonville government. Critics say those changes disproportionately affect how tax dollars are spent in black neighborhoods to this day. Another milestone would come in 2011, when Alvin Brown would become the first African American to be elected Jacksonville mayor.
Since then, progressive movements have been successful to remove what they perceive as symbols of hate. There was the renaming of Nathan Bedford Forrest High to Westside High. He was a Confederate general and a founding member of the Ku Klux Klan. DCPS is also pushing to change more schools named after Confederate leaders. And just this year, rallies for racial justice help influence local leaders to remove Confederate monuments throughout the area.
At the forefront in the racial justice movement is the demand for equal treatment by police.
In June, Action News Jax and News 104.5 WOKV assembled Jacksonville's mayor, sheriff, and state attorney, and we held an hour-long conversation with community advocates. The conversation covered a lot of ground, from a change in the mayor's stance on Confederate memorials in the city.
Why now? What specifically motivated you to make that decision now?
I've done some soul searching and I've evolved on the issue, and in my judgment, as a leader of this city of almost 1 million people from diverse backgrounds, it was time for them to come down.
To several exchanges about the release of police body cam video.
We've been talking about release to body cam footage for the past 2.5 years.
All that footage becomes public at the conclusion of our investigation, like every other piece of evidence or documentation in the case.
You're not completing your investigation fast enough.
I agree with you. That I agree with, and that is where we will improve.
It will happen, but not because of y'all, because of the people pressuring y'all to make
Christine, I disagree. It was always going to happen. It really was always going to happen.
But what I'm saying is it's just not on your time anymore.
We also discussed concerns about trust, police transparency, and the long-standing impacts of systemic racism in our city. How do you establish trust from your community when you have no outside force investigating and the citizens who are asking to be involved in the process don't have access either?
We can't unravel an entire system. We have to work on the trust issue.
You know, there's a lot of repair that needs to be done. We're talking about 401 years of suppression, oppression, racism, discrimination, and it's going to take a very comprehensive effort.
And since our special aired, policy changes were made regarding the release of police body camera video. That can now happen as quickly as 21 days. JSO will have 30 days to object to the release of video. And that could be because the criminal investigation is still underway and releasing that could harm the case. Extra time might also be taken by the state attorney's office to edit the video to include transcriptions, protect victims, and ensure accuracy.
Local officers we spoke with say they are often vilified for being in uniform. Action News Jax Bridget Matter shows us the impact on their lives and their families.
Nassau County Deputy Bobby Smith comes from a family of police officers. Becoming part of the Blue Line family made sense for him.
We all get into this job to try to help people, not hurt people.
Smith says while most days are fulfilling, he faces backlash for some for simply being in uniform.
I've heard people go as far as to say any police officer is bad because they're working for a bad system. Doesn't that frustrate you?
It does. And it's just frustrating because, you know, my first goal is I like to help people.
Smith isn't alone in his frustrations. I spoke to a local officer who recently retired early. He asked we conceal his identity.
When it became hostile for the police, when the police were just standing there to protect everybody, that's when I knew the moment for me was I was done.
He says the recent protests and unrest in our nation centered around police brutality pushed him to hang up his uniform and leave a job he initially loved.
I love being a police officer, but at the same time, I was ready to be done because I hate the attack that was on my calling and career. I hate it.
The impact of that public backlash is also being felt by loved ones.
It's been kind of scary for my family.
That's changed their behavior. No police bumper stickers on the family car or wearing police T-shirts in public. According to the FBI, there's an almost 15% jump in felonious officer deaths so far this year compared to the same time period last year. That's when an officer dies in the line of duty at the hands of a suspect. However, this longtime officer admits some change needs to take place within law enforcement.
When there's a few bad apples that make the rest of you look bad, it does mess with your psyche and your mentality and your heart of what you're doing.
Both men say they want people to see there's more to the badge and work needs to be done on both sides.
I would just want people to understand that there's people behind the badge. You know, this uniform is what I do, is not who I am as a person.
And when it comes to policing, it's important that the officers on the force are representative of those who they are hired to protect. Action News Jax Don Lopez shows us a local disparity.
According to the U.S. Census, as of 2019, Jacksonville's population sits at 911,507, nearly 1 million people. We wanted to know if the makeup of officers with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was reflective of the community. We focused on 3 groups: Blacks, Hispanics, and Caucasians. We found Jacksonville's population is about 58% Caucasian, meaning close to half of the population is made up of minorities. When it comes to officers at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, a majority, 73% of sworn-in officers are Caucasian. 31% of Jacksonville's population is Black, but only 16% of officers at JSO are Black. And 9% of the Jacksonville population is made up of Hispanics. Hispanics make up about 6% of JSO's officers.
The demographics within JSO are changing, including those with leadership roles. Earlier this year, I sat down with Dolores O'Neill, the first African-American woman to become a JSO chief. Her journey shines as a beacon of hope for Northwest Jacksonville, where she grew up. After escaping a difficult childhood in foster care, she rose to success at a corporate office job, but the streets called her back. Officer O'Neill patrolled her streets for about 3 years, was promoted early and often, eventually coming back to Zone 5 as commander. After 22 years, O'Neill was named Chief of Services at JSO.
I always thank God for being in this position because, you know, He chose me to do that. But I also know it's really not about me, and it's really about the people who come behind me, and it's about the people that I serve.
Chief O'Neill is a force. Her spot is reserved on JSO's Hall of History as the department's first African-American woman to be a chief. Still to come on Action News, Jax Gets Real, the next generation, how a movement for social justice is being led by America's youth.
Plus, inequalities in health care, how doctors and nurses can break through biases they didn't even know they had.
This is a special presentation. Action News Jax Gets Real about racial inequality.
One of the inequalities people of color have to battle is in health care.
Action News Jax Letitia Barriola reports that doctors may not even realize they're treating people differently.
Kenesha Whitlock's family says she knew what she wanted out of life early on: career, marriage, a house, and a baby. At 25 years old, she had it all, but that life was cut short just hours after the birth of her child.
Everyone should have the same chance to survive pregnancy.
It was 10 years ago that Whitlock delivered a healthy baby boy, Quincy.
She's hemorrhaging, and as fast as we can put blood in, it's coming back out.
But her health quickly failed. She died a day later.
Did you wonder if this could have been prevented?
Yes.
Whitlock's story is sadly not uncommon. New data from the CDC says women of color are 4 to 5 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related effects. Statewide Medical Director Dr. Kelly Wells says the reason behind maternal deaths are wide-ranging, from obesity to heart disease and even a lack of good insurance coverage. But there is another factor that must be acknowledged: implicit bias.
Income is the same, education level is the same, entry into prenatal care was the same. The only difference is race. And this mom died and this mom didn't.
Dr. Wells says if you're going to talk about health equity, you have to also have a conversation about bias.
And has been well proven in a number of studies is that minority women, particularly black women, tend to get less pain medication, are more often thought to be what we call malingerers, exaggerating symptoms and that sort of thing. And that's bias.
It's not easy for healthcare workers to counter biases they may have. It takes continual training on diversity and mindfulness about your own biases. But most of all, doctors should slow down and judge each patient and their symptoms differently, not based on past experiences with groups as a whole.
Our local Hispanic communities face the same kinds of issues we've been talking about, and it's the second fastest growing ethnic group in America. Action News Jax Lorena Inclan shows us the most pressing issues facing Hispanics and Latinos.
I would love for you, Victor, to present yourself to the viewers.
Wow. Well, my name is Victor Cora. I've been in Jacksonville now for, over 35 years now.
In the mid-'80s, Victor was stationed here at Naval Station Mayport and never left. He's also a proud Puerto Rican.
When people hear me speak in Spanish, they freak out. Wait a minute, where are you from?
He's just one example of how diverse the Hispanic and Black communities really are. He tells me the protests happening across the country really hit home.
I could be driving down a neighborhood, and again, just by my appearance, I could be stopped.
The pandemic has highlighted racial inequities, especially among Latinos and Hispanics, who are disproportionately represented on the front lines and in industries like hospitality, where many have lost their jobs.
The biggest issue we're seeing right now is healthcare. And the cost of healthcare.
Jared Nordland with Unidos US, the nation's largest Latino nonprofit advocacy group, says many are also getting sick more often than white people.
A lot of our people in our community don't have the luxury of working remotely from home. They're in the restaurants, they're in the hospitals.
Unidos US is now advocating for more resources from the federal government to help people of color bounce back. When it comes to racial inequality, Victor tells me Latinos and Latinas have an opportunity to come together. But it starts with finding common ground in a community that's made up of people from more than 20 countries.
I think that's one of the first things that I believe as Latinos and Hispanics we should be trying to do. Come together as one voice.
Still to come on Action News Jax Gets Real, allies to the cause of racial equality. How people outside of communities of color can lend their support.
Plus, the voices of the youth, how America's next generation is leading the rallying cries for change.
This is a special presentation. Action News Jax Gets Real about racial inequality.
2020 has been a tumultuous year, even if you take away the coronavirus epidemic.
Action News Jack's Courtney Cole shows us how several local and national events helped to spark a conversation and change.
A fire that had been smoldering for decades burst back into flames on Memorial Day.
I can't breathe. Please, the name of it.
Bystanders pleaded with officers to help a man they were arresting. One had his knee pressing into the man's neck.
He's not even resisting arrest right now. Check his pulse, bro. Bro, check his pulse, bro. You bogus, bro.
The death of that man, George Floyd, invigorated a movement that had been building and flaring for years. The nationwide movement quickly found its way to Jacksonville, ushering in days of mostly peaceful protesting that culminated in a massive rally in early June, attended by people across racial and socioeconomic lines. They called on city leaders to take a closer look at police and criminal justice reform and where the money is being invested in our area. Sheriff Williams and Mayor Curry were there and heard that message loud and clear.
You got to invest in infrastructure. Budgets have to speak to zip codes, neighborhoods that have been left behind.
It came hours after a Confederate monument from the 1800s was taken down in Hemming Park. The mayor promising all the other monuments in the city would be removed. Demonstrators were pleased with what they saw, but say more change is necessary.
No justice. No peace. No justice. No peace.
As you just saw, young people in our community are a big part of that drive for change.
Our color of our skin does not make us a weapon.
Many teens and young children marched alongside loved ones, calling for police accountability and equality. Others are working to get their peers involved through civic and social action.
I think the first way, especially as a high school student, is you use the platform you have, you use the circles you are in now, and educate the people around you.
Young Leaders of Today, the student-led organization, works to call attention to several issues, including how crime impacts local schools and the inequities in the juvenile justice system. He and Episcopal student Gabby Diaz are working to pre-register thousands of students to vote.
And it's just really important that the youth feel empowered in a way, and empowered in a way where they can advocate for the voices that they don't necessarily see in their environments.
We also introduced you to local 12-year-old Kedron Bryant, who's raising awareness through song. He went viral after the death of George Floyd for singing what has now become a rallying cry in the movement.
I just want to live. God protect me. I just want to live. I just want to live.
Coming up next on Action News Jax Gets Real, joining the cause, how those who want to help can become allies in the fight for change.
Plus, the culture of change here at Action News Jax, how we're applying a new way of thinking to our newsroom.
This is a special presentation. Action News Jax Gets Real about racial inequality.
It can be tricky for many Americans to navigate the racial equality movement. It is easy for well-meaning people who agree with the cause to say or do the wrong things.
Action News Jax Letitia Barriola spoke with a local advocate, Christina Kittle, about what people can do.
So how can they become allies of this movement?
Money, financing, if you can donate and there's an organization that's doing work and you know that they're doing the work, just see how you can donate to them. That always helps. Study history. So when I say study history, I mean study the same way that Black people, Indigenous people, and other oppressed nationalities have to seek out our history. I don't think guilt is a very good emotion for progress. What are some of the good things in history that people in my position have done, and how can I plug that into modern times and actually contribute to what's going on?
And the initiative isn't just external. At Action News Jax, we're also getting real amongst ourselves. We want our newsroom to have a deeper understanding of what's going on in our communities. Our goal as journalists is to shine a light on important issues and hear from all local voices.
We will be making a renewed effort to get these impactful stories into our newscasts on CBS 47 and Fox 30. If you want to see the stories online, go to actionnewsjax.com. You can click on Action News Jax Gets Real, the banner at the top there, and you can check out the stories. And while you're there, if you see stories we need to be doing, let us know. Send us an email, actionnewsjaxgetsreal@actionnewsjax.com. Thank you very much for joining us for Action News Jax Gets Real.
And stay tuned as we work to highlight these important stories in our community.